Welcome to my podcast. Today's dream, tomorrow's reality. My name is Vicki Poole. I'm a life coach, health coach, and a hypnotist at the Enlightened Peach. And this podcast is all about embracing our mosaic life. And some of you may ask, what is a mosaic life? Well, it's recognizing that all the pieces of our life, the good, the bad, the indifferent, have all come together to make us who we are. Change any one thing and we are different. With that in mind, I invite you to embrace your perceived imperfections and celebrate who you are. This podcast is unedited and raw, just like life. I will be your host, and I have a special guest from time to time. As a matter of fact, I have an amazing guest for you today, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. But if you have any ahas or questions, please leave comments or a voice message, and remember to like, share, whatever the little things are, so we can get this out even more. So now let's get started. So this gentleman right here is Scotte Burns. And I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself, but I'll start off with, he does an amazing thing. He and his wife, Tony, correct?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. And they travel on their Harleys and talk to people about love. And that's one of the things that kind of drew me to him. And so that's how he became a guest on this podcast. But I really want to let him tell you his story. And I'll be honest, I tend to be a little bit of an interrupter. You might say something that just all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, what? And then we might end up taking a little diversion somewhere else. And as long as you're okay with that, okay.
Yep, it's like having a conversation between two storytellers. That's
right.
Totally expected.
Yes. So why don't you maybe start with, how did you get to a place where you started getting into this idea of this was something you wanted to do, or did you know that at a very young age?
No, as far as the project itself, Journeys to Love really came together. That's the overall project name for the work that we do. Came together at the end of 2015, and I was getting ready to retire from teaching. I was an educator for 24 years, and middle school English mostly, and still came out perfectly normal.
Well, so you say.
And, yeah, well, it's a relative term, I know. But, you know, my wife and I, we had, because I'm primarily a writer, my MFA is in creative writing. As I was nearing the end of retiring from teaching, I thought, you know, well, I'm going to go write a book. And what do we want to write a book about? Well, my wife and I had been together we've known each other since junior high. We've been married 40 years. We're avid motorcycle tourists. And we thought, well, we'll combine our interests, because as we've gotten older, people continued to ask us, whether it was in the music business or in teaching or other fields, they kept coming to us with this question: what's your secret? You know, they wanted to know, you know, as if we were in a position to tell them, well, here's how you love people and here's how you live your life. Well, we're not qualified to do that. But we thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to go out and ask the people that we know could answer that question? All over the country, as many diverse people and places and cultures and lifestyles and events as we could discover, and look for stories from couples to see if we could answer that question. You know, well, what's their secret? Maybe there's an amalgamation we can come up with and say, here it is. Here's this big secret to love that everybody's after. So it kind of started as a sort of romantic project. You know, the two of us riding Harleys and, you know, collecting stories and doing photography. And well, by the second year of that project, we had discovered that there is a profound sense of loneliness and disconnect across the country. And the more stories we collected and the more people we started to talk to, the more we started to encounter people wanted to hear our stories first. It was almost like, you know, from the Taos Pueblo to military bases in Virginia to the Black Baptist churches in Alabama, there was this running thread between all these cultures and people where it was almost like seeking affirmation that the world that they lived in was still okay. Mm-hmm. People still loved each other and it was still a good place, and they had a place and they belonged in it. And it made them feel sort of, you know, we talked earlier before you started recording about that sense of connection. It made them feel reconnected. And they wanted to hear all of our stories before they'd even share theirs. And we thought, well, we're onto something much more profound here. And so we spent a couple more years on the road collecting those stories and putting material together for a book that by that point had a much different focus. Well, then 2020 rolled around, and as it did for most of us, the world ended.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and so that brought us off the road. We couldn't travel, there was all the travel restrictions. And so that gave me an opportunity to really devote myself to writing the book, which is now in the hands of literary agents. It's called A Map of Souls, The
Oh,
Quest for Love's
cool.
True Story. And in following up with all this sort of empirical evidence that we had about the nature and role and purpose of love, it put me into contact with people in fields I had never considered asking about the question of love, people in neurosciences and quantum physics and animal behavior, all these different fields. And we had talked to faith leaders, philosophers, lay people, and now we had all this scientific evidence too. And so I started thinking, what is it that all these people, we started out looking for the secret. Well, now we're onto a much bigger secret. What are the threads that run between all these different disciplines and schools of thought and cultures and people and ways of life? What can they agree on that leads us to an answer to really
That
what
would be
was
a big one.
essentially
What can they
the
agree on,
biggest,
right?
yeah, which
Yeah.
essentially leads us to the biggest question that we were essentially asking, which is, well, what is love? And if we can answer that, we might know what to go do about it. But it's funny, every person that I have asked, whether it's in public speaking or in our journeys or in the interviews, the other interviews and encounters that I've done, that we've asked that question, what is love, has given us a different answer,
Yeah. Well,
which to me is fascinating.
yes.
Go ahead.
I'll just share with you real quick. You said that, people were coming to you guys and wanting to know, what's your secret and everything. So
Mhm.
I've been a single woman for quite a few years now. And one of the things somebody told me was find somebody, a married couple or something, and find out what their secret is. So I knew this woman. And I asked her to lunch one day, and we sat down to lunch, and we're just chit chatting and everything. And I said, I really wanted to ask you some questions about your marriage and things like that. And she stopped and she looked at me and she said, why? And I start telling her, she said, oh, Vicki, she said, no, you don't want to talk to me. She said, out there, we look great. In here, not so much. And I said, really? And she said, yeah. She said, it looks good, but it's not good. And that's just what we do to make things feel better. And that was such an epiphany for me to realize that sometimes things are not as they appear to be. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it was like, it gave me this different thing that maybe my perception of things is not always what it is. And so it made me start, and didn't give me a sense of, everybody's lying or anything like that, but it did give me a thing of, so many people go through life with putting on a mask and portraying what they think people want them to be and everything, and they're not true to who they are. And that's what really woke me to thinking that I want to be my authentic self. And maybe I've been doing the same thing in my life with putting this filter up. And maybe that's why, as I was searching for this love relationship and everything, and I couldn't seem to find it, was because I wasn't being real. Does that make sense?
It did be, but one of the things that you said is really interesting, and it's something that we come across when when we do, especially when I do public speaking, and people find out we're
Mm-hmm.
basically love researchers. There's an automatic assumption that love has to do with relationships. That when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about a love story, we're talking about a relationship with another person. It has to do with feelings and emotions and things that you do, and it doesn't. One of the key findings that we've found, incidentally. What led to this, and I warned you beforehand, this is all going to be stories as we go. We asked a Tibetan Buddhist monk at the Karma Triana Dharma Chakra Monastery above Woodstock, New York. When you have the perfect hippie moment in your life, start talking love stories with the Tibetan monk in a Buddhist monastery above
Yeah.
Woodstock, and you have arrived. But when we asked him that love is question, he said, love is how we are. And I thought, well, beautiful, it's poetic, and it's the kind of thing that sandalwood incense made out of real sandals sitting in trees say. And I thought, that's lovely.
It's on the little tea bags.
Yeah, it's a nice meme, but I didn't really understand what he was talking about. Well, 2 weeks later, we interviewed a Irish jazz singer at this remarkable place called the Dog Chapel in St. John's.
Your sound is just a touch off now.
I haven't changed anything.
It's interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway,
now it's right.
We asked Kathy, this Irish jazz singer, the same question. She said, "Love is a way of walking in the world." And I thought, well, that's beautiful and poetic, but I really didn't understand what she was saying. A month later, we're interviewing Reverend Cromwell Handy, who's the current pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, Martin Luther King's former church, who's one of our icons for this project. And we asked him that question. He said, "Love is the way that we stay connected with the world." I thought, well, all these people are basically talking about unity. They're really talking about the same thing. Maybe they're on to something that I'm overlooking. Well, then all those conversations with people in quantum physics. I don't know how familiar you are with quantum physics and the double slit experiment and the double slit experiment. Well, without going into too much detail, what quantum physics is basically showing us through concepts like superposition and entanglement is the universe really is all one thing. And if that's the case, and consciousness it really evolves and controls and affects that one thing, and love is part of consciousness, I think we're onto a trail here that shows us love really is all one thing. And so what that led us to, and what one of the precepts of the book is that love is not an emotion. It's not an action. It's a state of being. It's the way that we are. And one of the ways especially psychologists tend to argue with me quite a bit about this, which is a fascinating conversation. And it makes total sense because psychologists deal with emotion. And so everything boils down to an emotional content. But I say, no, think of love in the same sense you think of a sense of humor. We confuse love with the way love makes us feel. When we ask people what love is, and they say it's trust, it's honesty, it's compassion, it's communication, it's duty. They give us all these wonderful metaphors, but no, those are the way that love makes you feel. Think of your sense of humor. Is a sense of humor an emotion? Not really, but it sure can make you feel a lot of different ones. If you feel funny or witty or amused those aren't your sense of humor. Those are the emotions that it engenders. And so that one finding is one of 4 key findings that we found about love that sort of, we're trying to take people out of this idea that your love depends on a relationship with someone else. It doesn't. It can certainly broaden that relationship, and you can awaken the love that's within them. But your love is not dependent on other people. It's intrinsically part of who you are.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Because it's one of those, the things of if you have to have love within yourself, even to be able to love someone, because if you don't love yourself, you're coming from a place of lack already, and you need to be full, have your cup full yourself. Is that what you're saying?
In a way. And something else interesting you said there. I did another guest spot yesterday, and one of the fellows asked me on that website how we deal with hate. Well, isn't hate just the opposite of love? I said, no, hate is very much an emotion. Love is not. If you want to look for, and I don't know why you would, but if you want to look for what the opposite of something is, you look for its lack. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is lovelessness.
I would have thought apathy.
Yeah, apathy, ignorance, sometimes fear, but certainly not hate.
Yeah, hate's a very strong emotion.
Different ballpark.
Yes, definitely. Well, I want to kind of go back to when you were young. Did you have a sense of love, or was that something that you grew to be looking for? Or is that even...
I'm not sure I could really answer that question, because it's funny. We were talking again before you started the recording about the sort of, they call it the 0 to hero story. And people find those things compelling. You brought up an example of a cancer survivor who then goes on to
Yeah.
counsel other cancer survivors because of that travail, because of that problem, that history that they had gone through. It both lends credibility and empathy to the position that they're taking. And when I got into the public speaking to try to bring some of the messages that we found through Journeys to Love to the helping professions and to education and places where it could have a sort of practical impact, I looked at my wife and I said, I don't have that. I just don't have that sort of, deep, dark past. And she stopped what she was doing. She dropped her glasses. She looked at me and she says, "Are you effing kidding me?" And then she reminded me about my own path because, yeah, my dad was a violent drunk.
Okay.
Tried to murder my mother. He was a
Holy
pedophile.
moly.
By the time I was 13, he was pretty much already gone, and he ended up, drinking and drugging himself to death. And later in life, later in teenage years, before I was 20, I found myself following in those same kind of footsteps. Addictive behaviors tend to, we have this nature and nurture argument, but I got the flip side, the worst side of both of those coins. So it was almost predestined I was going to end up following in those footsteps. And it was really the love of my wife and my family and, my dogs and the people around me that eventually led me to see a better path. And so I would say it wasn't something I was ever looking for, but it was certainly something that redeemed me. And I
Hmm.
think that's one of the reasons why in our work now, when we're on the road, the stories that I find most compelling are those redemption tales.
Yeah.
The ones, where people, they hit that rock bottom and then some loving person or action or being managed to resurrect them. Those stories to me are deeply compelling.
Yeah.
And I had to thank my wife for reminding me about the past. Go, oh yeah, you're right. I guess
Yeah. Yeah.
there was a few
Yeah,
bumps in
there
the
was a
road to
little bit of a
overcome there.
snafu back there, I believe. Well, because I love the stories, and I think we talked about this too. I love the stories where somebody has had horrible things that have happened in their lives. Not that I'm glad that they had horrible things, but that they come to the
Mhm,
end of that, realizing that without those things happening, they wouldn't have taken this path that they love, and
mhm,
that it gives them a sense of, I'm almost glad in some way that this happened. And I even had a gentleman that had diabetes and had to have his leg amputated, and he said that that was the best thing that ever happened to him because it
mhm,
changed the trajectory of his life. And so I'm always fascinated with stories of overcoming something and
mhm,
seeing this light, because I think some of the time it's because there are so many people that have the same kind of story, but then they have this thing about that is why they haven't done anything, and that's why they are in a bad place and everything. They use it as an excuse instead of
mhm,
something that actually helps them move forward. And I
mhm.
love the move forward thing.
Right. Well, and you hope, and this, part of the spirit of what we do is that we're hoping by connecting so many of these stories with people that they'll see across cultures, especially across cultures and races and ages and ethnicities and socioeconomic barriers, that so many of these stories, whether they're redemptive tales or lifelong love and devotion, duty stories, are ones that are common among all human beings.
Hmm.
Those barriers hold no sway. They don't they're no obstacle to love, and
Right.
we're really connected through those tales. When you brought up the redemption story, if you have just a moment, one that might particularly touch you, we rode through the Upper Peninsula, and we were on our way down to Detroit, and we stopped in and I want to say Saginaw, but it wasn't Saginaw. It's the northern part of Michigan anyway. The waitress, we talk to everybody. We find cops and newspapers and um, churches are usually our best sort of community. They know everybody, and especially in a
Hmm.
small community. And wait staff are oftentimes, because they know everybody in a town. We asked the waitress, we told her what we did. We said, we're looking for, stories about what makes life worth living, what connects people here, and she said, I've got to have there's somebody you have to talk to. And we interviewed this fella in the kitchen. He was washing dishes in the place at the time, and then he invited us over to taking the Harleys through places in the Michigan woods where no Harley was designed to go, to this trailer, and found this fella. And I don't want to give his name because he asked us to kind of remain discreet. I called him Alexander Manette in an article I wrote about him, because from A Tale of Two Cities, literally was recalled to life. He grew up as a gangbanger in East LA. Had 2 teardrop tattoos. I don't know if you're familiar with, in
Yes.
prison, what those mean. His arms are covered in prison tats. He had, notches down one arm. This is a guy that was rode hard and put away wet. Had a violent past, a drug history, had 4 kids from 3 different women, one of whom he took the fall for a drug conviction for her so that she could stay with their children. Because by this time he had the 4 kids and he wanted somebody to stay with them until he could get out of, until one of them was out of prison. And he took the rap for her, and then she abandoned him and the kids while he was in prison. Well, these children in 4 different foster homes managed to maintain contact with one another. And when the oldest was old enough to visit him, would bring him cards and letters and photos. And all 4 of these children managed to maintain contact with each other and with him. And when he got out of prison, the first thing he did was buy this godforsaken little plot of land in the Michigan woods and put a trailer on it and started building a house. And when we interviewed him, even a fellow that had been through this kind of hell in his life, he looked at us and he said, "I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to them."
Wow.
And he was redeemed. That's why I called him Alexander Manette, that idea of being recalled to life, redeemed through the love of others. And those kids had no reason. He'd given them no reason to have that kind of connection with him, but they did. And and I have no doubt that he'll spend the rest of his life making those kids' lives everything he can.
Wow.
It was just a staggeringly beautiful story.
Yeah, it's very uncommon to
More so than you would think.
really. That's nice to know.
And that's one of the inspirational things we're trying to get across to people is, we're so inundated anymore with stories about the things that divide us. And, one of our major problems societally right now is that we always start with the things that divide us. We want to know who you voted for and what kind of music you like. And, are you in a mixed relationship of some kind? And, what is it about you that I can find that I don't like? Instead of starting a conversation, one of our favorite conversation starters is, so who's the better cook? People love to talk about food. It brings us together,
Yeah.
Ask them about their love story. Ask them about their dogs. People love talking about their dogs. You find the things that connect us first, and then it leads you to those deeper tales. And when you get into those deeper stories, you find out this human family is good, and it's healthy, and it's connected, and it's looking for ways to affirm that. And we're kind of hoping to be that bridge.
Yeah.
When we were at that Buddhist monastery, they had one of the most beautiful prayers they offered from one of the acolytes was, "May I be a boat, a bridge, or a raft for all those who want to cross the water." And
I love
that's
that.
kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just had a thought just a second ago, but it went away. So
I'm glad that never happens to me. My train of thought is never derailed.
never. Well, so I know it's when I was looking at your bio and stuff, it said that you work with educational professionals a lot to help them to just tell me, what do you help them with?
Sure. Well, that's in the public speaking arm of what I do. I have 3 major keynotes that I give. One is to people in the helping professions, and so that would be psychologists, social workers, people in healthcare, life coaches, faith leaders, and those, the applications of love to overcome, practical applications of love in your personal life to be able to overcome the common barriers in the professions, which would be, emotional burnout and compassion fatigue, the sort of ethical boundaries that we have to cross sometimes, boundary issues themselves. There's some practical applications of this work in those fields. In education, because, I had 24 years as an educator, it made sense to take that experience and the experience from Journeys to Love and say, what is it that these two things have in common that we can offer? Well, that address is all about love. It's called loving to learn. Because most of us, if I asked you who your favorite teacher was, you probably have somebody pop into your head. Most people do. And those of us that are really fortunate, we have 2 or 3 of them. And what those people had in common is that they taught us, they made us bigger. They made us feel something inside. It wasn't what they taught necessarily, it was how they made us feel about ourselves. There was a bond of love there. We learn best from those that we love.
Right.
And we teach best the kids that we love. As a 24-year educator, I can tell you, I could reach the kids that I had that connection with a whole lot easier. I felt like I was more effective with them in the classroom. And that kind of connection doesn't have to happen by accident. Again, there's practical ways of taking this knowledge and saying, now that I understand what love really is and how it works, and that it doesn't depend on anybody else, and it's constantly there for me, it's available. There's another story I have to tell you. Love is available. I'll come back to it. And the other one is the other keynote that I give is for basically spiritual seekers and people that are interested in consciousness studies. Because much of the science that we've gone through as part of this project and what went into the book, it deals with consciousness studies and the link between love and consciousness and, the unity of love. And the idea that, quantum physicists are really just Buddhists with better data.
Yeah, I can see that.
That other, I'm going to loop back to that other one, because one of the people, and you, after listening to you talk, I think this is somebody you'd really enjoy. We interviewed a woman named LaTanya Jones in Lexington, Kentucky. And LaTanya she's an advocate for the families of death row inmates. She's the one that goes in and tries to counsel those families, and tries to, occasionally she's called in to testify as a character witness on behalf of people on death row. And she had, considering the situations and the people and the environment in which she works, to have such a loving spirit, I thought was such a phenomenal thing, to maintain that spirit and that sense of love. And when we asked her, she had a bunch of things I can tell you that were wise, but when we asked her that question, what is love? Her answer to us is, she said, love is available. It's always there. And if you watch some of our videos on our YouTube channel, you can see this interview with her. She said, the quote from her that I put in the book is, she said, we forget. There's all these negative things that happen to us, like I got bills to pay, or I got profiled by the police, or there's all these things that can happen to us that are negative, and but we forget that there's always something else positive happening at the same time. But our attention is so diverted by this negativity, and then we bring that to the next person, and it stops our ability to connect with that person through love. The love is always there. I asked her, I got to share this with you because this was so profound, because I asked her, I grew up fairly conservative politically, and that's proven to give me an unusual perspective on this work, because it's forced me to look at things that I always believed in a much different way. The more people I've gotten to know. And I asked her, because in my background, people were always pro capital punishment, and I said, forgive me if I overstep. And this is one thing we always tell people: I'm ignorant. I'm going to ask you a question that may overstep the bounds, and if I do, I'm sorry, but I'm curious. Aren't there instances or people, don't you run into people who say, well, this person committed an act that was so vile, so heinous, so beyond the pale of humanity that they deserve this? This is what should happen to them. And she looked right at me, after everything she'd been through and the murder cases she's worked on, and losing her own family to a murderer. She looked right at me. She says, I have never met a monster. I have met people who have done monstrous things, but I have never known a monster. I thought, well, that is an amazing thing to say, considering I'm not sure. And I even told her, I'm not sure I can agree at this point. I hope that sometime in my life, I find it in my spirit to say there are no monsters, because I'm not sure I believe that at this point, but I think that monsters can be redeemed as well.
I hope so. That would be That would be a good thing, because that's definitely something that gets dangled out there and shown to us more than the good things.
Mhm.
And I'll share real
Well,
quick, when thinking about that, suddenly I remember years ago, we had I had a client that had, her husband was a teacher, and they only had one car, and she was pregnant with their second or third child, and they always gave to the church, and they were always doing these things. And the school, that it was a private school that her husband taught
mhm,
at, and he went to work one day, and they gifted him a vehicle that they could share.
mm, nice.
And the entire school, the students, their parents, the teachers, everybody had gotten together to raise the money without him even knowing it, to give him this car, because he had made such an impact on so many people's lives. And at the
Mm,
same time, I had a client who worked for a news station. And she came in, and this was right at Christmas time. And she asked me, she said, do you know of any really amazing stories that I might could do for the holidays? And I said, sure. And I told her
mm,
all about this one, gave her the information of them. I called them to make sure it was okay for me to share. And so I didn't hear anything about it. So the next time I saw her, I said, well, what happened with the news story? She said, well, I approached it, and I put it out there and everything, but my higher ups wouldn't bite. It wasn't controversial. And so she wasn't allowed to report on this really uplifting, amazing story. I mean, because there was a lot
mhm,
more going on than just those things, but that's just the gist of
sure.
it. Because it wasn't going to get enough eyes on them. It wasn't
Mhm,
horrific. And um, that's one of the times that I started recognizing how um, just because they're showing this big group of terrible things happening doesn't mean that there's not a bigger group over here of things that are good. It's just they're not really,
absolutely. Yep.
you know, bringing eyes to those. And so it's really
Mhm,
um, interesting, when you realize how things are manipulated to show us the bad side. Like you said, when people meet, they're looking for the things that they can divide them. And and a lot of the news media, not to say that everybody does that, but a lot of the news media is showing us the division as well.
right. Well, and what's doubly worrying about that is that the algorithms that select what kind of material we're seeing tend to all reverberate around the same echo chambers. So even the
Hmm.
negative stories that we're getting are all basically from the same cultural perspective and the same, we're being molded into these tribes and then played against one another. And it's the heat of the friction between us is profitable.
Yeah.
Those strong emotions, they keep eyeballs on the screen. And it's not a question of right or wrong, it's viewership.
Right.
It's you to a slightly lesser extent. Another example of that, when I told you in 2020 when we had to come off the road, it gave me the opportunity to finish the book. Well, it also meant that, and you probably ran into this in your profession too, professional associations all had to, and industries, all those conventions and meetings and stuff stopped for a time. Well, that happened in the television and media industry too. And the major television industry convention is called Real Screen. And that's where all the networks and the producers and the film companies and the writers, they all get together to pitch ideas and sell stories and whatnot. And so since that was all being done online, we had access to that. So we bought a ticket and we got to go on Real Screen online, and we heard back from Tina Perry from the Oprah Winfrey Network, from Magnolia, from Paramount, from all the major networks that all loved the work that we were doing. We got some of the most beautiful personal rejections from that you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Discovery Plus was calling us and going, God, we wish we could help you guys out because you make us feel so good. And I'm going, I know, because people want this, they need it. There's a hunger out there for it. But they said no, because right now with the way the market was, they were selling three kinds of shows. And this is why you're seeing this kind of TV today. 2 years ago, when we did Real Screen, they wanted celebrity driven content. If people already knew you, if you were Sylvester Stallone and you have beautiful daughters, you can get a reality show. They wanted competition, anything that pits people against one another. And they wanted what's called, and we learned this term that still makes me laugh, it's called shiny floor. They wanted anything that's shiny floor. And that means anything that can be done in a studio environment where they can control everything a shiny floor would be like a game show or a talk show, something with a shiny floor. And we thought, well, we're not any of those things. And people are coming to us and go, we know, we just wish we could do this, but we're constrained by what we think is going to be saleable. And I'm saying, and my point with them and why we're now pursuing an independent film instead of television is, well, what's saleable is what makes people feel deeply. There's no rule that says they have to feel anger deeply to be connected. They can also feel love and empathy and hope. I think a little hope right now, especially in the political season that we're getting ready to head into next year, a little hope's going to go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's interesting, but I grew up in a family of hairstylists, and
oh, nice.
Yeah, and we all worked together at a salon, and it was one of those little smaller, quaint salons, and we were approached by a company, and what was it called, Salon of the South or something like that. It was a reality kind of thing. So they approached us and asked us if we would participate. Yeah, that sounds cool, right? So
yeah, sounds like fun.
Yeah, so they come in, they bring their cameras, and they want us working and everything. So we're working in the salon, we're doing hair, and everybody already knows, that these camera people are out there. And what they were doing is they were coming over and they would ask us a question, and then we'd answer the question, and they'd say, "Oh, do that again." And I was like, what the heck? I don't remember exactly what I said. And, and they were just kind of, perusing through, and they would take us individually and they'd ask us questions. And then they took all of this video and they presented it to the producer or whatever. And they got back with us and said, they really loved us. We weren't controversial enough because we were all family and we got along great. So I think they thought because it was family that we had all this angst, and everything. I don't know. And so we didn't have anything bad to say about anybody that was near us, salon across the street or anything like that. And it was kind of very strange to realize that they didn't want us because we wouldn't say anything bad about each other or the other salons in the area. And so that's kind of along the same theme. It was like that it wasn't controversial enough, so they weren't interested.
Yep, no fireworks.
Yeah.
No flash, nothing to see here.
Yeah. No nudity.
Yeah, I understand.
No fighting.
Yeah, not in the salon. No, charge extra for that.
That's all right. So I have a question for you. All this stuff that you and Tony are doing, and you've got this book coming out, and which I really want to hear about when that's going to, if you have a projected date and all that stuff for that. And I will tell you that I will be putting all of your info, your links and stuff in the description. And it's very easy for me to go back and add that one piece in once it's out and you've got a link. I can share that with everybody. So everybody that's watching or listening, kind of keep a lookout because we'll have a link in there at some point. But what I'm wondering is, with going through all of this and you're meeting amazing people and you're hearing amazing stories, and you and Tony already had this amazing love with each other, with yourselves and with each other. And so what is it that you feel like you've really gotten from this whole process? And what do you hope that other people get from that?
For myself, are you familiar with the what's called the Four Understandings? The book, The Four Understandings.
No, I know the Four Agreements, but not the Four Understandings.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it is the Four Agreements.
Okay.
I was thinking the Four Understandings of Love is what we do.
Okay.
The Four Agreements, I don't think really set in with me. Your work being impeccable, always doing your best. The things that was it Coelho that wrote the book said really didn't sink into me until I started this work. I think because I'm fairly introverted, and maybe that's a product of the upbringing. Have always had a sort of cerebral take on most things, and was never really hyper connected. I think that this work has really given me a much deeper understanding and appreciation of that sort of sense of human connection, and why the four agreements are not just something that we do personally, but it's a responsibility that we have to one another, which is another thing that love teaches us, is that it's not us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not us, it's us.
Yes.
All of us. And as far as everyone else, one of the main thing, we've got four main understandings that I talked earlier about the threads that sort of run through all these different disciplines and philosophies and spirits and cultures and science. And the four things that we've discovered are, I'll give it away.
All right.
Number one, love is not a feeling or an action. It's a state of being. And that has profound implications for the way that we treat one another and the way that we understand our love and our relationships. Number two is there aren't different kinds of it. People think that there's this kind of love and there's that kind of love. There's a love that you have for, ice cream, and there's a love that you have for your wife, and these are somehow different things. No, let's go back to, say, your sense of humor or a sense of curiosity. That is one thing. You can be curious about many things. You can find a lot of things funny, but that you have a sense of humor. You have a love. It's part of your being. The ways that you employ it, it's almost like the way that genes are expressed differently. Two people can have exactly the same genes, but they express themselves differently. So your love is kind of like that. There aren't different kinds of it. Love is one thing. Love is not given or received. It isn't something, and I'll give you a for instance of how this works if you want. It's part of one of the speeches that I give. Love is not something that you get from other people, and it's not something that you can give to them. And that also has profound implications for our relationships. And love is everywhere. It doesn't belong in some places and not in others, and it can be found no matter where you are. Those are the four things that everyone that we've talked to in faith and religion and culture, ultimately it boils down to those four things. And for that third one, this is one that's really difficult for people to understand sometimes, because gosh, it sure feels like we do. It feels like when you love someone, you're giving them something. And when they love you, they're giving you something back. But I'll harken back to my science teacher days. The analogy that I often use is the sun. We get no heat from the sun, even though it sure feels like we do. But there's nothing solid, there's no matter, there's insufficient solid matter or gases in space for heat to conduct or to convect. There's no way for that heat to move. Instead, the sun's energy is radiant. And that radiant energy, when it strikes the earth, it excites the molecules of all the matter that's down here, all the waters and oceans and people talking on podcasts and teachers and dogs, and everything that's down here is made of the same basic stuff. And when that radiant energy hits that stuff, it causes it to vibrate. And the force of that vibration generates heat within the matter of which those things are made. We're not getting any heat from the sun, but it warms us. We don't give love to someone else. They're warming something, they're awakening something that's already within us. And that's why I say, your love does not depend on anyone else. They can certainly awaken it and warm it and make you aware of it, but it's always there, just like it is for them. You're not giving them something, you're awakening something that's already within them. And it's something that we all share. It's part of our common consciousness. And, when I say that, when I start talking, going into consciousness studies and get into that element of what we're doing, I got to be honest, 10 years ago, that would have all sounded like patchouli smoking hippies sitting in a tree playing the flute stuff to me.
Yeah.
But after talking with people one of the most fascinating interviews I did in the course of writing the book was with a man named Dr. Eben Alexander. Dr. Alexander is a former professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical, and he's also one of the world's foremost experts in near-death experience because he had one. And so his take on, what love means after death and what life means after this thing that we call life, was profound. And I juxtaposed that in the book with the psychology conference that I'm talking to in October is actually the specialization in pre and perinatal psychology. They deal with birth psychology. And I interviewed one of the former directors of that, the professional associations putting on that convention, on what love looks like before birth. How does love affect the actual production of life? And so we've got stories about love from just outside the boundaries too, and they're even in finding agreement on these 4 key understandings. And the main one, and the reason I put it first, is that love is not an action. It's not something that you do. It's not something that you feel. You do and feel things because of it. And sometimes we confuse those things with love itself. But love is a state of your being. It's part of who we are. And I draw a distinction. Do you have a minute for a really deep thought?
Yeah. I love deep thoughts.
As I'm going through this in the book, one of the issues that I came up with is quantum physics shows us rather convincingly through the double slit experiment and other means that consciousness, the observer affects what they're observing.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that.
It's the observer effect is real. It's demonstrable. We know that a conscious agent affects the reality around it. Well, if that's the case and everything is one thing, what that means is scientifically, quantum physics is the cutting edge of science, and it's the best supported scientific model that we have of the universe. What that means is that there has to be some kind of universal consciousness. There has to be some ultimate thought that causes reality to be what it is. And to me, as a former science teacher, that's a scientific question, not a religious one. And so when I tell people, I go way out on a limb and I say, love is not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's a state of being. Oh, and by the way, God is not a religious principle. It's not a religious idea. It's a scientific one, and it's just a matter of logic. But when we use that term, and in the consciousness studies address that I do, when we use that term God, that comes loaded with so much baggage,
doesn't it?
Because then we start arguing about definitions and mythologies and comparative studies, and it just takes us so far afield. And so in the book, rather than I'm not going to say God, except just now because I did. I have to, so you know what we're talking about. But what we're really talking about is just the ultimate consciousness. Just everything is one thing, and we know that one thing is affected by an overall consciousness. That one consciousness, that big thought, the biggest of beings. And I thought, oh, that's perfect, biggest of beings. And so throughout the book, I just refer to it as Bob.
Okay,
it's just the acronym for biggest of beings.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
So,
when you were talking about the quantum physics and how it changes, the observer changes things, that's right. One of the things that I've always, well, I can't say always, since I've been getting into this stuff, I've been very, very fascinated with that, and how, people, because some of the studies that they did, not only did this observer that was right here change it, he could change it in another room as well. And, that just is mind-blowing to me.
Well, and change it after the fact.
Yeah.
Showing the time is no obstacle either.
Yeah. So all of that stuff is just amazing. And so one of the things that, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, is, the vibrational scale and whatever different things vibrate at, and love vibrates at, I don't even remember what it is, to be honest with you. But there used to be a lady that I studied under a little bit, and she would always talk about, you wanted to keep your vibration at love or above. And
that's nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So that was always what I was trying to do. It's not always easy. It's simple. It's not always easy. But I'm just wondering, do you feel like, because she's talking about the vibration of love. So is that something totally separate from what you're saying about the being love? Am I even asking the question correctly?
I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly, but I think from what I'm hearing, I would say no, I don't think it's the same thing,
Okay.
because what you're describing is probably something that is going to be measurable. It's what's called a neurocorrelate. Some activity in the brain or some physiological response that we can plot on a chart and say, we know that this thing operates at this frequency, this wavelength, and those are physiological reactions, or the neurocorrelates are basically brain activity that correlates with things that you're thinking or feeling. And I hate to keep going off on the deep end on you here, but this stuff is just,
I'm all for it. Don't
it's
worry
just
about
so
it.
fascinating. We don't really know, and this is one thing I was amazed when I talked to Dr. Alexander and some of the other people in neuroscience. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what causes a conscious experience. What causes what causes this sort of holistic, subjective, combined experience that we call consciousness. We can look at the brain and we can see different areas light up, and we say, oh, well, this area is lighting up when you feel this thing, therefore this brain area is connected to that emotion. And that very well may be, but it also may be that the brain is not producing these things, it's receiving them. And if you looked at the electronics inside a radio, let's say on your cell phone, when an electronic signal goes through your cell phone and you hear a voice, you don't think it's coming from your phone. You know that the phone's just a receiver of that information. It's receiving data and it's producing an output that's then readable by whoever's interpreting it. Your brain very well may be working the same way. The brain is not what neuroscience is starting to show us, the cutting edge of neuroscience, is that the brain does not produce consciousness. It receives it. And that makes total sense if you understand the universe as being, this thing that's guided by an overall consciousness. It would make a whole lot more sense. It's less moving parts for your brain to be receiving something that's already a fundamental part of the universe, rather than this somehow magical thing that we can't explain, where consciousness just pops out of 3 pounds of organic matter in your head. That's when you look at it that way, that's a logical leap that it's much more difficult to make than saying, we are all part of this one thing. We're receiving and expressing it. So back to your original question, the vibrational frequency of love may be measured as a neurocorrelate in the brain or some kind of physiological response, but I think that love itself is probably going to transcend anything that we're going to be capable of measuring in the traditional sense that we're talking about with those things. Does that make sense back?
It does. It makes sense back. Yes.
Okay.
So what is your census from your book and all these studies and everything that, because you started this journey to talk to people about what is love, right? And so what is it that helps me as a human to have that love within me? Is that God, I don't even know how to ask this question.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think in effect, what I'm hearing you ask is something I really can't answer. What you're asking me is, how do I love? Or how do I love better? How do I know this is love? We get all these variations on this question.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking is if love is not a feeling, it's not emotion, then how do we know it's there? It's not an emotion. We can't feel it. That's what I'm meaning.
How do you know your sense of humor is there? How do you know?
Well, I guess if somebody says something and I laugh, then I guess I have a sense of humor.
Or if you have a sense of curiosity, how do you know that that's there?
It just demonstrates.
Yeah, it manifests somehow. There's something that catches your attention, that you feel this part of what you are, your state of being, this receiver that you have is making you aware of those things. And so love being part of you is why you perceive it. So the closest I can get to answering your question is something that I talk about in the book. And that's one of the questions is, well, why do we love? Once we get to the point in the book where I'm going, okay, we can kind of identify some commonalities in it. We kind of know what it is a lot better than we did before. But why? It's not something that happens. It's something that is. Why is it? And the best answer I can come up with so far is we love what grows us. We love what grows our souls. That when I use that metaphor of the sun, we don't get warmth from the sun. We love the things that warm us, and we're aware of them because we love. That's why, for a person whose life is fulfilled and rich with, social connections with people and doing good works and charity and the kinds of things that we sort of attribute to a loving person, they're doing that because it's making them bigger inside. And this is when I talk to students, this is the analogy, it's the term that I use. We love what makes us bigger. And part of what makes us bigger, part of what makes me bigger is when you are. That's why teachers love what they do. When we can look at you and say, you are somehow more than what you were before because of what we shared together. Oh God, to us, that's the purpose of life. That is love. So your love is there when you experience it. And as far as whether it's genuine or not, then you get into all kinds of complicated psychology.
Well, see, I think with me,
qualified.
As being a life and a health coach, one of the things that is prevalent I work primarily with women, is that women tend to be so overly critical of themselves, whether it's their body or whatever it may be. And there are some people that I've worked with that could not even look at themselves in the mirror and say, I love you, because they didn't feel it. So I'm just, I guess I'm trying to see how that correlates with what I do with my clients, to help them to feel that love within.
The first thing that occurs to me, it may again be a little bit off the deep end. I hate to keep qualifying by saying that, but it really is kind of a meditative technique. And I don't know if it's going to be applicable for you, if it's something that, people have different paths that they take to find these same answers. But when you say that, the thing that occurs to me is when I have these discussions with people and we use terms like Atman or soul or spirit, and people, especially people that are, I don't say atheists, because we tend to use that term too much and incorrectly, but basically that don't believe that, that living things have a soul. I say, well, how do you know? Strip away all the thought. How are you aware of what you're thinking? Don't think. What makes you aware of that thought? We go back to what, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. He wanted to find the one thing that could not be doubted. And what he arrived at is a piece of indubitable logic, and still beautiful to this day. The fact that I'm thinking, even if what I'm thinking is wrong, even if what I'm thinking, I'm being fooled into thinking, I'm still aware. I'm still aware that I'm thinking it. When you strip away all thought, when you strip away everything, that flood of, oh, am I doing this right? Am I loving correctly? How am I in my body? And, when you let all that go, there's still a part of you that doesn't react to any of that. It's just aware of it. That's your spirit. There's a part of you deep inside that is simply aware of all these thoughts and all these feelings. It's aware of your existence. It's that part of you that is that universal consciousness. And again, it sounds so flowery to say that, but it's true.
No,
so for people
that
struggle with those things, I would say, find a place, if it's possible. And for many people, it takes years of meditation to even find that spot, that quiet place where you let all the thoughts happen. One of the mistakes that people make in meditation oftentimes is that they're trying to stop negative thoughts. No, don't. That's a never-ending battle. It's not going to happen for most people. It takes the discipline of a lifetime to be able to stop what you're thinking.
You have to be that Tibetan monk.
Just, yeah. And that's, for most of us, that's not going to happen. We're thinking a million things at once. That's why sometimes we suffer from insomnia. Our heads just won't shut up. Just let it happen. Just find that place in yourself where you're aware that it's happening. You're not reacting to it. You're not judging. It's the key to happiness, is not judging things. I can tell you that, but people ask us, well, what's the key to, secret to love? I don't know, but I can tell you what'll make you unhappy. That's judgments and comparisons. That's
it.
whole other
Yeah.
stories there. But that part of you that is simply there, it's aware of all those negative feelings. It's aware of the love. It's, you find that, and you'll find the love within yourself, because the
Right.
love within yourself is part of that awareness. And that's what
Right.
I've been trying to get across to people about this being part of your state of being. It's such an essential part of life.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is by Michael Singer, and it's The Untethered Soul.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yep.
my favorite book, and I always recommend it to all of my clients to read. Not all of them do, but yeah, that's and the surrender experiment, that was even better. And so I've been on that journey, with learning all of that stuff for quite a long time. And I've tried to help my clients with it, and actually became a hypnotherapist, so that not only could I help them there, I could help them with a little bit of hypnosis to help kind of boost whatever it is that they're wanting to change, And so to me, it's like, sometimes I can tell people, or let's just say I can tell a client that, let's start working on the love of self, and I'm always blown away with how hard that can be for some people to actually put themselves in a place where they're deserving of love and that kind of thing. And so I'm kind of it's like all of this stuff has just got my mind just going like crazy,
Good.
because like I said,
I
it's
think
something that I
if we
always
have
work with. Pardon?
Sure. No, I was going to say, I think if we have a mission in life with one another, or missions in life, I think one of them is to help each other think and feel things deeply.
Yeah.
There's no greater compliment than when I finish a speaking engagement or a podcast guest appearance, or talking to anybody, when they say that, thank you.
Yeah.
To look at me and say, wow, you really made me think about this stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you. I had a student leave my room. I gave this lesson on the relativity of time and black holes to a group of 13-year-olds, which is, if you can get through the relativity of time and general relativity with 13-year-olds, and they're coming back to you, and they're all excited about what they learned. And I had a kid come up to me and she says, my brain hurts. Excellent. Our job here is done.
I know, that's how I feel when I've worked with a client, and I can see the difference in them over time of, how they're showing up for themselves. And to me, that's the whole amazing thing of life, is to show up for yourself and be who you are. And I know you said love's not, you feel an emotion about love, but it's like to feel that love for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, you can feel it. I'm not saying, when I say it's not an emotion, it's not a feeling. I don't mean that you can't feel it, but what you're feeling probably has a lot of different names. Is it compassion? Is it duty? Is it all these things that we call it? You can certainly feel those things, and there's nothing in the world wrong with saying I feel the love. Well, yeah, you do. You're feeling that facet of it. Absolutely. So I don't mean to suggest that there's no such thing as feeling love. You're just not all at once. we couldn't. We don't.
Yeah.
Almost go off a whole nother tangent. Dr. Dan Hoffman gives this brilliant speech on the existence of reality and how our perceptions are designed to govern how much reality we receive. We tend to think, well, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, you're seeing, 0.053% of visible light, which is a very tiny spectrum of the slice of the electromagnetic spectrum, you're not seeing reality. You're seeing the parts of reality that allow you to live in this existence right now. And I think to a large extent, and I'm hoping to have this conversation with him one day, I think to a large extent, our understanding of love is very similar. We only hear within a very narrow range of frequencies. We only see within a narrow band of visible light. Touch what's within arm's reach. And I think to a large extent, our experience of love is always going to be incomplete as long as we're experiencing it in this sort of limited, I don't say limited form, but love is so vast and so fundamental to the nature of the universe, and any aspect of it that we can bring into our lives that enriches us is always going to be good, but it's always going to be such a small piece of what's actually out there.
Yeah. What is it that they say that there are 10, is it 10,000? I don't know. I'm probably off on the numbers of things that are around us all the time that we could see. And
Right.
we see, what is it, like 1,000 maybe? I don't even know. I used to know that number, but it's just gone out of my head. And so as we're looking around, there are just a plethora of other things that are there for us to see, and we don't see it because that's not what's in our focus. The same as when you get a new car that you've never seen on the road, but you just really loved it, and then suddenly they're everywhere, and it's our focus is on that. Now that to me is amazing. Yeah.
And what a brilliant metaphor, what a brilliant comparison we can draw from that to how much of the love that's in the world, that's all around us all the time, that, as LaTanya said, that's available, that we're just not perceiving.
Yeah.
It's there. It's there. It's in the stories of every person we've talked to. It's in the lives of, it's in our history. It's in our science. It's in our faith. It's just so integral and such joy. It's the reason for our existence.
Right. So
and I can prove that.
Definitely. So the thing to be is to be open to seeing the love, because that's when we can't see it, is if we're closed down and we're not open to it. So
right. Just that sense of sort of central awareness of just let all the thoughts about it go. Just be aware that it's there. It's within you. It's within others. Yeah, all these other things are complications. They're thoughts, and they're splinters and things that we throw in there that can complicate things. And what I said before, I know I threw it out as kind of an aside, but it's true. When one of the questions we commonly get asked, outside of this whole secret of love thing, which we discovered is a really bad question, but there are things that you can put your finger on that do make people unhappy, and because they're unhappy, they're obstacles to their awareness of love. And the primary of those things is judgments and comparisons, especially in relationships, which is where we started. So we're versed a little bit in that area. Couples that make comparisons of their relationship to other relationships, or their spouse to other people, or the way they are to some ideal that they had about the way things are supposed to be, those things always make people unhappy.
Yeah.
Because the reason you're making judgments and comparisons is because you're already feeling inadequate.
Yeah. And just like I shared earlier,
better than everybody.
Yeah. And just like I shared earlier, the people that we're looking at comparisons to might not even be the truth of what they have anyway. And you're comparing yourself to something that's not even real. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you say that, there's another interesting parallel we can draw to something that came out in the book. Oftentimes when people find themselves with those kinds of doubts and uncertainties and anxieties about relationships and love, but about everything else too, they tend to want to ask others, well, how do you see this? What am I like to you? Let's get a cosmopolitan survey going about me and see, and that's just never going to be totally accurate, in the same regard that, and this was always a delight for me when I was teaching, One of the things that kids don't understand, when I would record them, if I record their voices or I record them on video, almost every kid hates the way they sound in a recording. And what they hate even more is when I tell them that's what your voice actually sounds like. Because what you're hearing is the sound waves of your voice reverberating through the atmosphere, reverberating through the air. That's the way your voice comes across to other people. The only person in the world that hears you the way you do is you, because you're the only one that's hearing those sound waves reverberating through your skull. Your voice doesn't actually sound like that. It sounds like, so it really is fundamentally different between, what's in here and what's out there. And I think our perceptions of ourselves are oftentimes the same way. We are the only people that see us sort of the way we do. And we can never really totally communicate that to someone else. So your point about, loving yourself, and that's a theme with a lot of people we talk to, that's so important just to be aware, not to judge, not to compare, just to be aware that that's part of you. That's where that self-love comes from. And that's how you build that sort of, strong sense of center. And the ability to love yourself. It isn't something that you have to do. It's something you have to be. And God, it's hard to tell people, how do I be that?
But, it's kind of the same thing as we don't see ourselves physically like other people do, because when we're looking at ourselves, we're looking at a mirror image of us, which is the opposite of what we are. And so it's really fascinating about that too. Not only do we not hear ourselves the same as what other people do, but we don't even see ourselves the same. And plus, people are seeing us from their lens of the world as well. So that's probably not even an accurate vision of who we are either. So
our self-perception is always different than what it is with other people. I think part of the key there is looking at that fact and going, okay, that's fine. Because, in the end, if that center is there, if that love is there, you can look at yourself and say, okay, I may not totally understand myself, but I kind of like who I am. Oftentimes that's enough.
That's where I hope to bring most people to, is I like me just like I am. I don't have to do this and do that, or change this and change that to be a lovable person. And I can be that just now.
To make my love what it should be when it's going to be what it is.
That's right. That's right.
And it's something, and I don't know how much time we have, but I wanted to just throw this one last quote out there with you, because one of the things that in the TED talk that I gave, one of the quotes that I did watch, by
Campbell, the way, I watched that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, he, Campbell had this brilliant, of the many brilliant things he had to say. He said, every story you hear is your own. As human beings, we are all part of a collective story. So when you start doubting yourself, think of your favorite hero tale, because that's part of you too. This is, being part of a collective means that we are so much more together, than we can be separately. The sense of separateness and division between us is an illusion.
Yes, definitely. Well, we are getting close to time. I'm looking at it. So this has been fascinating.
Storytelling.
I have
been
loved
awesome.
every minute of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if anybody out there has any other questions, or they want to get in touch with us, you can always reach us through our website, which is easy to remember. It's journeystolove.com, or through my speaking website, which is scotteburns.com.
All right, perfect. And I will, in the description afterwards, I will put all the links so people don't have to go and type anything out. They can just click right on the link and they're there. And just as a quick reminder, as soon as I was going to ask you, when is the book supposed to be out? Do you know?
The book is currently part of our business plan. It's in the hands of 2 literary agents right now, but depending on where that track goes, we may end up self-publishing. So I will keep I'll keep updates on, there's an update on it on our website. And if anybody wants to know when it's coming out, what the progress is, they can always check there. Thanks for bringing it up. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and definitely keep me in the loop on that, because I really want to be able to put the link to the book, and I want to get the book as well. So,
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So I'll get the book, and then I'll put the link on all my stuff so that everybody can get it very easily. So
Thanks,
this has
Vicki.
definitely been a pleasure. And for everybody that is listening or watching, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, because it's definitely been a little bit of a stretch in certain areas. And I love having those kinds of conversations.
Yep.
So with that said, have a blessed life and full of self-love.